You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 on Instagram and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we have a special guest. Nicole Benjamin handles complex, high-stakes commercial litigation, product liability defense, and appellate cases, and is a shareholder at Adler Pollock Sheehan in Providence, Rhode Island. Nicole is also president of the Rhode Island Bar Association. Congratulations on that, and welcome in, Nicole.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So one other thing I do want to mention that makes this a little bit more special is that Nicole and I graduated law school, very highly touted and known as one of Roger Williams' best and most successful, I would have to say. So congratulations along the way on all your success.
Well, thank you. We had a great class, and it's great to be here with you and seeing what you're doing here.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. So before we get into your story, which is super interesting, talking about like selling vacuum cleaners and working at Filene's, which I thought was really kind of interesting. So you were just had the tremendous honor of being elected president of the Rhode Island Bar. So congratulations on that. But I really just want to know, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. So for me, it's the culmination of so many years of service to the bar and so much that's been given to me. So, I'll tell you a little bit about my backstory in terms of the bar, because I think it really makes it relevant. And that is that when I was in college applying to law schools, there was a scholarship that was made available to students who were either residents of Rhode Island or who were interested in attending a law school in Rhode Island. And I was both. So I grew up here in Rhode Island and knew that I wanted to practice here and chose Roger Williams University here in Rhode Island for that reason. So I applied for this scholarship, and the scholarship was offered by the Rhode Island Bar Foundation. And fortunately, I was the recipient of the scholarship, and that meant that I got to go to a lunch where I was honored, and I got to meet a whole bunch of members of the Rhode Island legal community. And that was the beginning for me. So throughout law school, I stayed involved in the bar because I looked at it as this was this wonderful gift that they had given to me. And after I graduated from law school, I got involved in some of the bar committees and ultimately landed on the House of Delegates about 13 or so years ago. And in Rhode Island, the House of Delegates is the governing body of the Bar Association. So all bar activities run through the House of Delegates. And after a number of years on the House of Delegates, I ran for the executive committee, knowing again that I wanted to continue to further my role with the bar and to give back to the bar what had been given to me. And I viewed it as this tremendous community that had given me so much in my career. When I think back to some of the lawyers who mentored and shepherded me when I was a junior lawyer, they all were members, very active members of the Rhode Island Bar. So for me to be in this role today and to be able to give back to the organization so much of what it gave to me and to instill that sense of community out there for some of our more recent graduates from law school, our newer lawyers, and then of course for those lawyers who haven't been involved in the bar in the past and getting them involved today. So
Wow.
I view it as a tremendous honor.
No, that's amazing, and you can definitely detect the passion and the gratefulness in your voice about being president and so involved with the Bar Foundation. I think that's a great story. Thanks for sharing that piece with us. So to back up a little bit, you are a native roadie, like a Rhode Island person, right? I don't know if they call it.
I am.
I'm from Maine. I'm a Mainer, even though I live in Mass. But you went to URI. My wife's actually from East Greenwich, so she's a Rhode Island person too. But you wrote for the Good 5 Cent Cigar. I've heard of that before. And you were selling vacuum cleaners. Let's go back. So basically, I went through this a little bit, which you submitted. I think this might have been your first President's Corner, and that's just gold. I suggest everybody read this if they haven't seen it. It's totally your lawyer story right there. So tell us about selling vacuum cleaners. I think you had a moment there where you were like, I need to be a lawyer.
Yeah, so I'll go one step back, and it's
Perfect.
interesting that you raised the good 5 cent cigar. So
Yes.
I was a journalism major in college, and the good 5 cent cigar was the student newspaper at the University of Rhode Island. Very active in journalism. I loved it. I thought I was going to be a newspaper reporter. And again, another scholarship story, but when I was in my junior year at URI, I received a scholarship through the Rhode Island Press Association. And they had this wonderful dinner. It was held at the Hotel Viking in Newport, and they had a keynote speaker. And the keynote speaker was, at the time, the Chief Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, Frank Williams. And he was there to talk about Abraham Lincoln. So that was his, go-to story. He is a Lincoln scholar, and he was there to talk about the life of Lincoln as a lawyer and how that related to the press. So as the scholarship recipient, my parents and I were seated at a table with Chief Justice Williams, and we met him briefly over dinner. And it came time for me to go up and accept the award. And I went up to the podium and I turned out to the crowd and I said, I look forward to a career in print journalism. And I went back to the table and I sat back down, and Chief Justice Williams turned to me and to my parents and said, no, you're going to go to law school. Now, mind you, I had met this man for all of an hour at this point, but I suppose he saw something in me that I didn't know in myself at that point. And when I think now about, the skills that it takes to be a great lawyer, writing, of course, is one of them. Sure. So I'm sure that's something he was thinking about in terms of my journalism background. So in any event, that evening, he planted this seed. And I stayed in touch with him for the year after that, and gave a lot of thought to really becoming a lawyer. And you mentioned the vacuum cleaners. So at the same
before
time,
you get into the vacuum cleaners,
sure.
I do want to jump in. So did you lose sleep that night? You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's pretty cool to have that, have a Chief Justice say that. I mean, I know down the road you end up clerking for him, right? So
yeah, I did end up clerking for him.
What was that night like? You were probably pretty pumped, right? You were like, okay, that's really interesting.
So I don't think I even appreciated the magnitude of it. So at that same dinner, he said to my parents, if you go to law school and you do well, you could be eligible to be my clerk someday. And now my parents knew nothing about what that meant. They thought he meant file clerk. And they were a little bit offended, we're going to pay for law school, and then this happened. So I think it was one of those moments where I didn't even know enough about what the practice of law was. I was learning through my journalism classes. I took some media law classes, so I was starting to get a flavor for it, but really didn't know enough to even have that moment that this is really a change in my life. So it was just planting a seed, really.
I think it's crazy how we can look back and even though it seemed like one small thing that somebody said to you, it had such a big impact. You could sort of start connecting the dots a little bit as you go, the older we get. So going into vacuum cleaner sales, let's hear it.
Yeah. So at the same time, I was doing what I needed to do to pay for URI. So I was selling vacuum cleaners at a discount department store at the time. And that's really where I had some quiet time to myself to think. And that's where, I started noodling on this idea of, maybe I will go to law school. So, selling vacuum cleaners and, thinking about, how am I going to get through the rest of URI, paying for my books. And then we learned that this discount department store was going out of business. And that was a huge shocker for me. I loved my job there. I thought I was quite good at selling vacuum cleaners. I learned the amperage of a Hoover wind tunnel, right? So that was all going fine and well until we learned that the store was closing. And that meant I was out of a job. So off I went to sell women's shoes
Filene's?
At Filene's.
So okay, very important question. What happened to Filene's basement? That was a dope place back in the day. I don't know if you ever remember it, but
I do. Okay. Both Filene's and Filene's basement both went out of business some years later. I guess I have a history here of employers that go out of business.
That's good.
But I started selling women's shoes, and I did that through my first year of law school. So
really, so we all had the employee discount, and we didn't know that we.
That's right, you did. Nobody took advantage of that.
I could have used a suit or something. I really could have used like a suit or like some slacks or something
Right.
nice. But okay. Wow. Okay. Well, that's good. I like the you have a very hard work ethic actually, and we remember it in law school. I don't know when I say we, I honestly don't know who I'm talking on behalf of. Maybe myself. But can we? I want to jump into law school actually, like the
Yeah,
Roger Williams experience. I
sure.
went there. You went there. Probably two different experiences. But so like, what was it like to be able to attend law school in your home state?
One of the things that I found most challenging is that I had a life outside of law school. My family was all very local. My friends from college and my friends from high school were local.
Wow.
And I found it very hard to create that separation and to have the
Really?
diligence that I needed to have in law school and to have the understanding among my family and my friends that I wasn't going to be available in the same way that they would otherwise expect
Did
me
you
to
live at
be.
home first year, or did you have an
I did
apartment?
not.
Okay.
I had an apartment. I lived close to campus,
Yep.
and I went back and forth to the mall for my part-time job.
Nice. It's nice.
So
It's good.
yeah, yeah. But I think being in Rhode Island, one of the great benefits is what I said earlier in terms of knowing I wanted to practice in Rhode Island. It made perfect sense for me to attend law school in the state that I wanted to practice in, and that opened up so many opportunities for me that I wouldn't
Smart.
have otherwise had. So you can remember back in our first and second years, the networking that we did on campus, where lawyers would be on campus and we get to meet practitioners. And then
Yeah.
I think back to our second year of law school. We had the moot court competition, and you alluded to it earlier that ultimately I clerked for Chief Justice Williams. But really, the way that played out is not the conversation that I had had with him those years before, but that I had advanced in the moot court competition on
Sure.
campus
Sure.
to that
Yeah.
final round, right? So it was like an audition when I got to argue before the Rhode Island Supreme Court in
Unbelievable.
that
Yeah.
competition. And ultimately, that's the night that he ended up hiring me as his law
Did he
clerk after
remember
that
you from that
competition.
night? Because look,
He
I mean,
did.
let's say like he runs into like tons of students. I wasn't implying that just because he saw you that night, but I didn't know if does he like remember you? Because I'm sure he when he
He
hired you,
does.
he did.
Yeah, I stayed in touch. So,
Okay.
I
Stay in touch. Yep.
shepherded
Great.
that, nurtured that relationship over
Smart.
the years. So, I stayed in touch with him. I would write him letters asking for advice periodically and just kind of stayed connected to him. But it wasn't until he saw me in that final moot court competition that he knew I actually had developed the skills to be
Wow.
his law clerk.
That's unbelievable. Did you have a mentor, would you say, in law school at all?
I think many people mentored me in law school. I mean, I think about, some members of our class who I look at as great mentors and just
Really?
people who, were great study partners and people who I really enjoyed, being challenged intellectually by. And I think, also some of the professors I viewed as mentors, less so in terms of people in the community at that
Okay.
point. I don't think that, as a first or second year law student, I had that kind of contact with the legal community as much.
Gotcha. So, what advice would you give to a student, a young student let me start again. What advice would you give to a first year student anywhere, Roger Williams or any law school?
I mean, I just think immersing yourself in it and giving it your all. I mean, 3 years is such a short period of time to sacrifice. And if you
Right.
do
Yeah.
make that sacrifice, then it pays dividends, for the future. And I think back to, when we were in law school, folks who would say, you live like a lawyer while you're a law student, you'll live like a law student while you're a lawyer. And, I saw that among some of our peers, so I tried really hard to be frugal
Yeah.
in my law
Yep.
school years,
Yep.
so that I would come out with a solid foundation. But also making sure that I immersed myself in whatever I could, whether it was law review or moot court or an extracurricular of some sort. I tried to take advantage of all the opportunities we
Were
were
you on both of
given.
the? Were you on both?
I
Wow.
was,
Good for you.
yes.
That's amazing. So it pays off, everybody. Law review, moot court, successful career. Here we go. Nicole Benjamin showing you that. So let's move on to your 2 years for Chief Justice Frank Williams. So you get in there. Was that right after law? That was right after law school, leading up to joining the firm. So what was
That's
that
correct.
like? What do you think a clerking job brings to the table for uh, early on in your career?
Yeah, I think it gave me the opportunity to really hone my writing skills and
Right.
my analytical skills. And the piece that I loved the most was the teamwork. So, I had a group of clerks that I worked with. So in the Chief Justice's chambers, he had 3 law clerks. There were 3 of us my first year, and one of whom was the lead law clerk. And then in my second year clerking, I became that lead law clerk and got to mentor the 2 other clerks that worked with me. And I just loved the idea that we could put our heads together and think about complex legal issues and talk and have open access to the judges about those same things. That was, really a learning experience, but also a growing experience for me. So, I went to law school straight out of undergrad. I didn't have, that career first. So, I was pretty young, and I think I needed those 2 years to really mature and to make my analytical skills that much stronger. So I had the opportunity to work on, at the time, it was a very significant case in Rhode Island. It was very public who worked on it, so I'm not telling any secrets here by sharing, but in Rhode Island, we had the longest civil jury trial in state history that had happened while we were in law school, that went up on appeal while I was clerking. And it was something really fantastic that I had the opportunity to work on.
Wow, that's awesome. So what's the transition like from being in a clerking position to a big law firm? I mean, like, did you have to sit there and send letter after letter, or did you already, did you slowly start working for them, or have you met somebody there? How did that happen for you?
So the case that I had just mentioned was a case that involved many, many lawyers. And one of the sets of lawyers that were involved in that case ended up being my colleague here.
Okay.
So that's how, I initially was introduced to the firm. I got to see great lawyering through that case. That piqued my curiosity and interest in the firm and prompted me to apply. But to get to your point about, how do you then transition? I found the transition from a clerkship to a position as an associate challenging. And the reason I found it so challenging is because I loved that collaboration that we had clerking. And it was just constant. We were talking with one another and brainstorming and not thinking about how much time we were spending doing that. And then all of a sudden you get to a law firm where you're billing your hours and everybody's in their offices and it's quiet and nobody is collaborating that way with the first year associate necessarily. They might be doing that, as time goes on. And I found that really challenging. And, my way of combating that is I just, probably annoyingly showed up in everybody's offices and asked for more work and asked to collaborate, and being persistent in that respect paid off.
So tell us a little bit about more about your first year. Like, was it what they say for big law firms? I mean, were you working like 18-hour days? And did you feel that law school, and I'm not picking on Roger Williams or any school in particular, but do you think the law school education prepares you to work at a big law firm?
Yeah. So I actually think that the law school background did help with working at the firm. And the reason I say that is when we went to school, and I think this is true for many schools, including Roger Williams today, there was such an emphasis on practical skills. And I can remember taking a class where we pretended like we were little law firms and we submitted pleadings to the faculty secretary's office and things like that. And that was great because it taught me that sort of discipline of like writing a memo and getting it in the file and figuring out how you bill and all of that. So I do think I got some of that out of law school, but to answer your question, was I, working 18-hour days as a first year associate? I think I probably still am. So yes, no,
Wow.
I mean, 18, not quite, but no, I mean, I put in my time, and my sort of rule of thumb was I wasn't going to say no to any opportunity. I felt blessed to have the opportunity.
Love that.
And, assignments that came my way, I mean, I just ate it up. I wanted to learn. I wanted to grow. Anybody who would give me something interesting to work on, I was all ears. So, I worked really hard, in my years as an associate. And I think that, ultimately paid off in the practice that I have today. I think, when you're devoting that kind of time to it, you're learning and absorbing so much. But I mean, my first year was really spent working on complex, interesting issues and writing as many memos as I could churn out. So
really, so what would you say is a little more? Can you even compare like the first year of law school, the first year at a big law firm? Like, I know it's different stuff, but like, I guess from like a mental aspect, like which is more challenging?
Well, they say that first year of law school, they scare you to death,
Yeah.
right? And I think that, first year associate, was I scared to death? I think that I was afraid of failure.
Okay.
So, I was going to do everything I could to demonstrate that I had what it took. And, I didn't come out of an Ivy League, law school, and I felt like I needed to prove myself. And that meant, putting the extra time in and giving it the extra work, and ultimately it paid off.
It's interesting because I had Alan Dershowitz on the podcast a couple years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, and one of the things I asked him, because he was associated with Yale or I'm sorry, he was associated with Harvard and big time like Ivy League law schools. And one thing I really wanted to ask, which I did, was, and I got a good clip of it on Instagram. So, like, what is there really a difference between the caliber of student at a Harvard, a Yale, or somebody who's at a little like less known school, and the best law students at the smaller school are just as good as, like, the not so good. There's no difference really when it comes down, and plus the smaller law schools, lesser known law school, makes more of the trial lawyers too. So his response is obviously a lot more clear and succinct than what I'm telling you, but I really like enjoyed asking him a question like that. So I don't know if you have any like opinion on that after working with all different attorneys from different schools.
I do. And I'm a big believer in the students who have, maybe had a tougher time and demonstrated themselves, because I think at the end of the day, the work ethic is what matters. I think that, you can teach somebody how to read and analyze cases. You can teach somebody to be a better writer. You can teach somebody to be a better advocate, but you can't teach them to have work ethic. And to me, that's, the biggest piece. So I think, those students who maybe had some hardship or faced some adversity and overcame that through their hard work and determination and grit, to me, that is like the ultimate skill set that I look for, particularly in those who want to become trial lawyers.
Wow. Okay, that's awesome. So you're obviously part of like the hiring. Do you have associates who are working for you right now? Like,
I do.
what's your setup now like?
Yeah, so we have a group of associates that support all of the shareholders here. So I'm in the firm's litigation practice. So we
Yep.
have litigation associates. We have other associates that are assigned to our corporate department or that work for our labor and employment practice group, for example.
Nice.
But we pull associates in and try to make the experience one that you're constantly learning, and that you're working hand in hand and side by side the partner that's assigned to the case. And that proves to be a pretty successful model. It's a pretty traditional model. It's, the
Yep.
way I see most firms working. From time to time, I've had associates who have been assigned to me for a particular period of time, given, sort of the nature of my practice. But overall, we have a great group of associates that support us in the matters that we have.
That's awesome. So, what advice would you have for an attorney to handle the stress of a law firm job? How do you do it?
Yeah. I think the way I look at it is you've got to know yourself, and everybody approaches the stress differently. I'm a big believer in understanding what your own personal strengths are. You've probably heard of like Gallup strengths before, and I'm a big believer in understanding what my strengths are and also what the strengths of my teammates are. But I think that's what helps me, because I know that if I am doing it my way, and my way is probably a very regimented, focused, disciplined way, then that alleviates the stress. Where, if it's more scattershot, or, it happens over a period of time, like that to me is, less focused, less disciplined, and probably not my style as much. But I think it's a matter of like finding what works for you. And that's, how I've always managed it.
Got it. So one thing I noticed is you were counsel for a year at
Yes.
APS, like before you moved on. Like, what does that exactly mean to be just
Yes.
counsel? Like, go from associate to counsel to partner? Like,
So we decided some years ago that it made sense to have a model where associates transition to counsel for 1 or 2 years before then becoming shareholder. And we thought that was really important because that 1 or 2 year period would allow us to provide extra resources rather than calling somebody a senior associate, but to give them a more prominent title where they'll be respected in the business community for having that more prominent title,
Okay.
and to really nurture them in terms of their marketing and networking in those years. So one of the things that our firm tries to do during that 1 or 2 year period is just give as many resources as we can to the person, whether it's support with marketing or putting them on boards and getting them involved in the business community or getting them the extra coaching that they might need. Those are really like the 1 or 2 years that are those formative years so that they are ready to jump in and become, in our firm, we call them shareholders, partners in other firms.
Okay, that makes sense. So congrats on being a shareholder, obviously. So can you tell us like what it means to handle complex, high stakes commercial litigation cases? Like, I think I must have missed that day at Roger Williams because I don't really like when you say those words together, it kind of just gives me anxiety. So if you could just
Yeah.
explain like what all that means, that'd be
Sure.
awesome.
So I guess the way I look at it is the clients who come to us with their worst problems, right?
Mhm.
So these are the problems that could cause their business to fail. They are the problems that could be of such high publicity that it could cause either business or personal harm to themselves. It could be that the type of legal matter is so complex from an analytical perspective that it kind of falls into that bucket. So over the course of my career, I've been fortunate to work on some very complex matters, some multi-district litigation, which is sort of rare to have here in Rhode Island. I've worked on class actions. I've worked on many cases involving unique constitutional issues. And those I put in the category of, complex, either commercial or complex high stakes litigation, where it really matters, what the result is. It's not that, this is sort of a cookie cutter case. This is a one-off, once in somebody's, lifetime kind of case that we're really pouring a lot of resources into, and that the outcome and the result matters. And oftentimes those are the kinds of matters that also require an appeal, whether you are the prevailing party or the unsuccessful party. And that's another piece of my practice is on the appellate side, where I handle appeals here in the Rhode Island Supreme Court, in the First Circuit, and I've also handled appeals in the Third Circuit.
That's amazing. So like what types are you just taking those types of cases now? Like what types of cases are you taking at the moment?
Yeah, so my caseload really varies. I wouldn't say that those are the only kinds of cases that I am handling, but the matters that come my way are typically the more complex. The appellate side, I'll get involved in cases that I have handled the trial court level matter, or there are cases where somebody else has handled the trial court matter and I'm being brought in to really scrutinize the record and give a second look to what's been done, and to then think through the legal issues from a different lens and then bring the appeal or defend the appeal, whatever the case may be. So it's a little bit of a mix that way. And then, the other big piece that I haven't mentioned much is on the products liability side.
Yeah.
So I defend products liability matters. I find that to be, particularly interesting.
Wow.
And that has brought me really across the country. So those
Really?
matters, yes. So I have matters, both here in Rhode Island and then across the country. One of the areas where, I've litigated beyond Rhode Island, rather often has been in the context of aviation defense,
Okay.
which has brought me to a number of other jurisdictions where those cases are pending. Those are, pretty unique cases, and the bar, the defense bar and the plaintiff's bar in the aviation side is rather small. So you end up, with a wide variety of cases in different jurisdictions.
How do you like that? I loved I loved the class like in law school. Like I thought it was interesting stuff. I actually thought I'd end up being like personal injury like out of law school, but kind of just never happened. But what do you like doing the personal injury? Excuse me, the product liability defense? Yeah.
I do. I enjoy learning about each state's law because everybody looks at it differently. So,
Yeah.
a lot of times this is not common law. A lot of times it's statutory law that governs. Rhode Island doesn't have a statutory scheme for products liability, but many states do. And learning about how they deal with joint tortfeasor liability or apportionment issues can be, very interesting. And I enjoy learning about that and helping clients work their way through. And that the other piece that I think is very interesting is you really get to learn the product, right? So it's
Yeah.
not that, you're going into it as just the lawyer, but you're actually going to the factory, you're going to the lab, you're learning, what the chemical composition is of whatever you're dealing with, you're working with the experts.
Wow.
And to me, that's really interesting.
Wow.
Because I never stop learning.
That's awesome. So like, what are some of the things that you did to elevate yourself as a young lawyer and to like build your practice in your law firm? Give us some background about that.
So I'll tell you what I think now is a funny story. At the time, I probably didn't think it was so funny, but when I was a young lawyer, blogs were just a new thing, right? So like they were kind of like an up and coming thing. Everybody was talking about thought leadership, and I thought, well, I want to be a thought leader. I want to have a blog. And our firm didn't have the technology to have a blog. We just didn't have that as an interface on our website. And as a young lawyer, I was maybe a little bit too timid to ask for that. So instead, I went out and I spent a few weekends writing blogs. And these were all my ideas. I was going to have an appellate blog. And I wanted to, market myself as an appellate lawyer. And although I was a young lawyer, I had the experience of having clerked. I did know what happened inside the Supreme Court. I knew, how everything worked there. So I could add that sort of expertise to my practice. So I was going to do this appellate law blog. So I wrote a whole bunch of blogs and went out and said, okay, what am I going to do with this? I don't have a blog site. So I actually taught myself HTML over a series of a few weekends and put together like a mix between like a WordPress site and like a cobbled together HTML, site. And at the time, we were using like point and shoot cameras. We didn't have cell phones that took pictures. So I would go out and I would take pictures of the courthouse and I'd post those on my blog. And I ultimately went to our firm's executive committee and said, here's my idea. This is what I put together. This is what I want to do. And I think the reaction I got was, we have a budget for that. So, I probably spent an awful lot of time unnecessarily. But in the end, I can't tell you how grateful I am that I did that at that stage of my career.
They probably loved you. Like they saw that you did all this. They were like, oh my gosh, like we love you. They saw that you did all this like work on the weekend and you're really like hustling to do something different. I mean, that's incredible. And by the way, like we have a website, thelawyerstories.com. So if you want any of those blog posts to live there, we would happily take them.
Super. So this, this blog has lived on. And I mean, I can't say that I post nearly as faithfully as I used to, but over time, our firm did get a more sophisticated website. We built a blog interface. It has, it all connected now and the blogs are there. And I can't tell you how many people will stop me on the street today and they'll say, oh, I read your blog. I mean, it's something I wrote 10 years ago, right?
Oh,
but it's still very relevant to the practice. It still is coming up in, the Google searches. And that ultimately was the way I built out my appellate practice. So I think people started to identify me with the appeals. I started presenting on appeals. I'd present an annual seminar. I think this is the 9th or 10th year I've done it. And that's just led eventually to the appellate practice I have today.
I love that. I love that story. Have you gotten admitted in front of like the U.S. Supreme Court yet, or no?
I have.
You have? Okay. All right.
Yes,
so,
and
did you go with Roger Williams?
I did. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So, one thing when I reached out to you, like we talked about a little bit, or you touched on, which I thought was really, really interesting. And I'm sorry it's coming so late in our episode, but I want you to tell us about the Rhode Island Bar Association's Leadership Academy, because that sounds really important.
I'd love to talk about that. So, in my preparation to become bar president, I thought about it this way. The presidency is only a year. And I knew that coming in, I would have to come in with a strong plan to do anything of significance. And I thought a lot about the need to get some of our more junior lawyers involved, and to not just get them involved in the bar, but to get them in the pipeline to leadership in the bar. And I think one of the greatest setbacks we've had is the pandemic, which, prevented us from being together in person. And when I think back to the experience that I had with the bar, community is probably not strong enough a word for the way I felt about it. I just felt like it was, this group that had my back. They were, there to mentor me. They were there for, the good, the bad. And I really looked at that as a very formative aspect of my upbringing as a lawyer. So I want to be able to give that to others, but I also want others to be interested in having that. So, I thought long and hard about how can you do that in a way that makes sense for younger, newer lawyers. And I started talking to bar associations across the country. So one of the things that I've been doing is I've been traveling and meeting bar presidents across the country.
Wow, okay.
And it's been wonderful. So, getting ideas from them. And the first thing I would ask anybody who would listen to me is, what are you doing to engage your newer lawyers? And over time, I started hearing about other states that had developed curriculum. Some of them call them leadership academies, some of them call them leadership programs. But over time, there was, this consistent theme that other bar associations had done something very particular to nurture and mentor and train some of their younger and newer lawyers. So I set out to do that and to build curriculum that would really make sense. And what I mean by that is that it would make sense not only for their involvement with the bar, but it also would give them something to bring back to their own practices. So the idea that, they're getting coaching and professional training that they might not otherwise be getting in their day jobs. They might be at a big firm that has the ability to support them in those resources. They might be working for the state. They might be working in some other government capacity. They might be working for a small firm or for themselves where they don't have that professional coaching. So the idea being, that you provide them with that, and at the same time, teach them about what the Bar Association does and what it can do for them and how they can get involved. So the way we've structured it, we've just rolled this out. We've put applications out, and we are taking on 15 students for our first year's cohort.
Yep.
It'll be a 9-month program, and at the end, there's a commitment that they have to participate in the bar in some meaningful way. So participating on a bar committee or in another way after they graduate from the Leadership Academy, so that we keep them connected and that we can have the opportunity to bring them into that pipeline of leadership ultimately.
Wow. So you said it's like a 9-month program?
It's a 9-month program.
Okay.
It meets once a month with a different topic each month. And we're doing everything we can to bring in top-notch practitioners and top-notch coaches and consultants to really make this different than, it's not your typical CLE program, but it's this opportunity to have this really top high-end experience that we didn't offer before.
So between the months that you meet, do they have an opportunity to reach out to anybody, or if they have
They do.
follow-ups or?
Yes, we've built into it a mentorship aspect. It's interesting because we have so many members of the bar that have reached out to say that they are willing to help. I think people really are looking for that connectivity again and that sense of community building. So that's what we're seeking to do. And I'm really excited to see, how it will increase the leadership of some of our newer lawyers in the bar.
Yeah, that's such a great idea. I mean, I'm sure we should have had that, years ago. So congratulations to you for that initiative. So tell me, I love community. I'm continually building the Lawyer Stories community. It's a global community. I mean, I've met virtually and in person now, hundreds of lawyers. We've had events now. Tell me to you, what does community mean? I mean, you keep coming back to this idea of a strong Rhode Island community. I mean, going to law school there, I know it was small, probably intimate. I think a lot of the attorneys probably know each other. What does it mean? What is your idea of community? What does it mean?
Yeah. So, I'm a big believer in the idea that people need people. And I just think that that's true in all walks of life, whether it's the practice of law or otherwise. But I think that as lawyers, we are carrying such great burdens, right? We're carrying our own burdens, our clients' heaviest burdens, and that can be weighing on us. And the piece that resonated the most with me was reading a law review article written by a Third Circuit judge, Judge Krause. And what I took away from the law review article was the idea that community associations, whether it be a bar association or another association, have the ability to impact a lawyer's wellness and in turn civility. And I just think that that is such a powerful concept, the idea that when you bring people together and they have that sense of commonality and they feel that sense of community and they have that sense of belonging, that their wellness is improved, that their satisfaction and happiness and outlook is improved. And of course that translates into greater civility, something that we're always challenged to think about in the practice. So I personally love the idea that bringing people together and supporting them in that way not only has the effect on themselves, but also on the practice as a whole and the way the public perceives us in terms of our civility.
That's awesome. What about like a strength-based leadership, and like how can it be? I know we talked about leadership in the academy and like to create these like high performing legal teams. Tell me a little bit about that. I know that's something that you're really into.
It is. And this goes back a little bit to the Leadership Academy, but also another experience that I've had. So as part of the Leadership Academy, we are building in a strengths-based training component. So what I mean by strengths is Gallup strengths. And if you're not familiar with that, Gallup has a strengths finder tool. It's been around for I think several decades now, that allow people to understand better what their strengths are. And the idea is if we focus on our strengths and not our weaknesses, then we are happier at what we're doing, we are more satisfied, and we're doing things better. And at the same time, we can understand where we might have colleagues who have strengths that are different than ours. And when you put together people with different strengths, you can just imagine the better outcomes that you can get. And the reason it's impactful to me is back in 2013, Gallup did a survey, the State of the American Workforce Survey. And that survey was to gauge employee engagement across the country. And unfortunately, Rhode Island's score came back dead last. So we were 50th in the country. And what that told us is that employees in Rhode Island were not only disengaged, they were actively disengaged, meaning that they were doing things to hurt their employer. They were doing things like calling out of work sick when they weren't sick, that they were stealing from their employer. There were things like that that they were doing that was like, really characterized as disengaged, highly disengaged. And Gallup came to an organization that at the time I was a member of the board, and I later went on to chair an organization called Leadership Rhode Island. And we kind of put our heads together and said, well, what if Rhode Island was like a microcosm? Like, could you use that to say, if enough people know what their strengths are and utilize this tool, that you might improve employee engagement? And we started as an organization rolling out this strengths training. So we delivered it to as many employers as we could, some of the state's largest employers. And over time, we saw that score improve. And in 1 year, it went from 50 to 15th. Now, I can't tell you.
That's incredible.
Right? And I can't tell you that it's just that variable. I don't know what else could have happened in that year. But the idea that enough people knew what their strengths were utilizing it in the workplace, and found that they were more satisfied in their jobs because they were doing what they were good at. That to me was just really powerful. So I started thinking, well, all right, if that works for just the general workforce, what can it mean for lawyers? And if you think about whether it's a legal team, like let's say it's a litigation team, and if you're pulling in people with different strengths, maybe you have people who are, really great at getting things done. They are the people who can deliver on the product. but maybe you also need the people who are more strategic. And if you pull them into that team, and then at the same time, maybe you need somebody who's going to bring, a sense of levity to the group. And so you're looking at it from that lens, and you're bringing this like combination of people together with different strengths. Like, how powerful is that? So, you can think about it in that context. I present on this issue, in different contexts. And one of the areas is in-house legal teams. How can you do this in a corporate setting?
Okay.
And then the other place where it works, I think very, very well is in nonprofit settings. So
Okay.
when you're looking particularly at a nonprofit board and you're saying, how do I bring on new board members? Well, if you bring them on based on their strengths, then you're always making sure that you've got, the best minds sitting around the table to move the
Right.
organization forward. So that's something I'm really excited about. It's something that I've been excited about for a while now. And then to be able to bring that to the Rhode Island Bar through the Leadership Academy is something I'm really looking
Yeah,
forward to
that's amazing.
doing.
So how long's your term?
1 year, just 1 year.
1 year. What's that all
That's
about?
it.
I mean,
That's
you don't have time to really show. You only get like one class of the Leadership Academy. Can you run again for like the next 5 or what?
No. So in most states, it is a 1 year term. And I think that's a recognition that it's really in that 1 year, you're working 2 full-time jobs, right?
Okay.
So, I mean, I do have my day job to
Yeah.
continue to do. So, so the 1 year, but I think that's why all of the planning going into the year was so important for me, is to make sure I came in knowing exactly what I wanted to accomplish so that in that year I can accomplish it.
Wow. Okay. So you were the recipient of the Roger Williams School of Law 2016 Alumni Service Award. Do you remember this?
I do remember this.
Okay.
Yes.
So I mean, you win a lot of awards, so I don't know if like you remember that particular award. So
that one's a special one to me.
right. So like you're giving back to the community, like you're like the ideal alum. So tell us a little bit about that, like what that means to win something like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, I looked at it as the law school did so much for me, right? So I viewed it as the law school took a chance on me. I wasn't the top of my class in undergraduate. I didn't have the strongest LSAT score or the highest GPA. Roger Williams took a chance on me. And in that first year, I think, I guess the way I would look at it is to say I had the opportunity to prove myself. And I think, I did that during the first year. And I was really grateful for the people who were there to support me in that journey. So again, and this is a giving back story, but when I graduated, I wanted to do everything I could to give back. And at first that was, they say it's time, talent, and treasure. Well, I had time and I didn't have a whole lot of treasure in those early years. But I was giving back by volunteering. I was going and serving as a judge for moot court competitions.
Okay.
I was, attending anything they asked me to attend.
Yeah.
And then over time, that led to my involvement with the Alumni Association. I ultimately became the president of the Alumni Association.
Okay.
When I was pretty junior, I was an associate at the firm when I served in that capacity.
Okay.
And then that ultimately led to the position I hold now on the board of directors. I serve as vice chair of the law school's board of directors, and I'm a trustee at the university. So both of those are my ways now of giving back. And I spend an awful lot of time on campus. Our board meetings are held on campus. Our board of trustees meetings are usually 2 or 3 days on campus. And it's
Really?
great because, we get to interact with students. We get to see what's happening on campus. And then, of course, my proudest moments as a member of the board are sitting at commencement and seeing the graduates walk across the stage and knowing the bright futures they have ahead of them because they've gotten a great education.
There you go. That's amazing. How many people are on the board of directors, by the way?
The board of directors, gosh, there's probably about, I'm going to guess 25.
25,
I might be off on that. It's a pretty decent sized board.
Okay.
It is.
Okay. So tell us, I'm going to let you go in a minute, but like what keeps you motivated? Like, how do you do all this stuff? I mean, you're very motivated. You're very driven. It's incredible.
I think part of it is I absolutely love what I do.
Good.
So I think, if it wasn't something I enjoyed, I couldn't possibly be this motivated, but I love helping people. I love seeing, the results that we get in court. And that to me makes it all worthwhile. I also think that I am a lifelong learner. So that's what I get to do every day. I get paid to learn, right? So I am learning the law. I am learning the client's products. I am learning, the client's business structure.
Right.
And that to me is really satisfying as well. So, and then of course there's the service component that we've talked quite a bit about, which, giving back, which that alone, motivates me. So
yeah. Well, that's amazing. Is there anything else that you wanted to share that I might have missed? In this episode.
I think we've covered it, and this has been a lot of fun, a lot of reflecting and walking back down memory lane here, and really thinking about some of our good times in law school. And our class really came out and we're superstars. So love seeing what you're doing, and
Thank you.
Wish you great success with Lawyer Stories.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much, Nicole. And we appreciate you taking the time. I know it's late, and stay right there for a minute. And everybody else, thanks for tuning in. Wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourselves. Cheers.